Hi artists, it's Mrs. RT at the Angelo School, and I'm going to read a book to you today about one of my favorite artists. Her name is Yayoi Kusama, and the book is called Yayoi Kusama Covered Everything in Dots and Wasn't Sorry. You can see even the book cover is completely covered in dots. My name is Yayoi, and I am an artist. I'd like to tell my story. I was born in Matsumoto, a historic city in Japan, with a beautiful castle. I've always loved drawing, more than anything else in the world. When I was a little girl, I carried a sketchbook with me everywhere I went. I drew everything I saw. I would sit in the meadows between the flowers and plants and see things around me that other people didn't. I rushed to draw them in my sketchbook before they disappeared. I used to dream of becoming a famous artist. I longed to fly away to other countries where artists were doing exciting things. So when I grew up, I decided to leave Japan. My mother didn't want me to go, but I was determined to make my dream come true. I got on a plane and flew to America. I arrived with a suitcase full of drawings and some money I had hidden in my shoes, but the money soon ran out. With nothing left to buy food, I went to the market to pick up scraps. I would find fish heads and cabbage that had been thrown away, which I used to make soup. At least it was something. I lived on my own in an apartment where I painted day and night. I painted hundreds and hundreds of dots onto a large canvas. The dots came off the paper and ended up on my dress, table, and walls, but I wasn't sorry. Each dot was part of thousands of others. They made me feel like I was a single dot that was part of an infinite universe. I was making lots of paintings, but I was poor and alone. One day, an elegant lady came knocking on my door. Her name was Georgia O'Keeffe, and she was a famous painter. I had written her a letter asking her advice on how to become a successful artist. She wanted to know how I was and offered to help me sell my artwork. She introduced me to her art dealer, who immediately bought one of my paintings. Wow. I continued to paint lots of pictures, and soon I was ready to put on my first solo exhibition in New York City. It was a success. I had more and more exhibitions and more ideas for new works. I made soft cushion shapes, which I used to fill rooms, boats and shoes, and covered couches, armchairs, and hats. I covered bags and dresses with dried pasta. I filled rooms with glittering balls and lights. I created mirrored rooms which reflected everything over and over again. I also organized performances that I called happenings, where I covered people's bodies in dots. It was pretty daring thing to do at the time. My art was starting to get noticed and written about in newspapers, so I decided to change the world for the better. I organized a happening on the streets of New York to protest against the war in Vietnam. I covered lots of men and women in dots, and they handed out leaflets with messages of freedom and peace. But it didn't last long, because the police came and arrested me. As soon as I was released, I started working even harder than before. I held other happenings, I made films, published newspapers, and I created unusual party dresses. Some had big holes cut out of them, and others were made for two people to wear together. I even made a huge dress that could be worn by as many as 25 people at the same time. I loved creating all of this new experimental art, but there came a time where I had to stop because I became unwell. I left New York and went back to Japan to get better. Back at home, I saw the beautiful mountains and cherry trees in bloom, but a lot of things had changed since I left. The meadows and streams that used to inspire me to draw had been built over, and the cities were filled with smog. This made me sad. Then one day, the snow covered everything, transformed the landscape, turning into something pure and beautiful, just how I remember it when I was a little girl. I found a studio near the hospital I was staying in and started working. Creating art made me feel better. I began writing. I would paint during the day and write at night. Although I missed New York, I decided to stay in Japan. It's where I still live today. I still work nonstop, making paintings, writing books, designing clothes, and other objects. And the thing I love to make most? Pumpkins. I've always loved pumpkins, with their beautiful shape and sweetness, and I want to show all the love I feel for them through my art. I also like to cover them in, you guessed it, dots. You won't believe what I picked up. A pumpkin when I was a child, and it talked to me. My artworks have become really famous, and you can see them in many different art galleries and museums around the world. My dream came true. You can see this pumpkin's talking to her. It says, "You did it." And that is about Yayoi Kusama, the artist who covered everything in dots. And that is a picture of one of her mirrored rooms with three-dimensional pumpkins covered in dots. So today, we are going to make a pumpkin inspired by Yayoi Kusama, and we're going to cover it in dots, just like all of her artwork. So if you don't have your materials yet, now would be a good time to grab them. You can pause the video to get them. You should start with a pencil if you have one. I'm going to start it in marker just so that you can see it. And we're going to make a pumpkin. Remember, pumpkins can be a little bit tricky to draw, but they're a natural shape, so there's hundreds of different types of shapes of pumpkins and different sizes. So if yours looks a little different than this, if the shape is a little funky, that's okay. If you start with a pencil, you can always erase it and try again. And we are going to start with one long, thin oval. You'll see each of these sections of the pumpkins is a similar shape to that. So we're going to come to this side and do another one. Sometimes I do it a little bit bigger on the bottom. This one went down almost in a straight line and then curved at the bottom. This one curved a little bit sooner. And on this side, we're going to do the same thing. Curve it around, come down, and curve it back on the bottom. And we're going to make one last one on this side. Come around and loop down to the bottom. Then we're going to make the stem, and the stem just comes up from the middle. We'll bring it up, and I do a little thin circle on the top, if you can see the top. And sometimes pumpkins might have a little curl or some leaf at the top. And remember, the shape of the pumpkin can be different with every pumpkin that you see. So now you're going to go through and cover it with dots. These are all different size dots. Some of them are big circles with small ones next to it. Some are just little tiny dots. And then you can go through and color your pumpkin. If you have a marker, or you could use a black crayon for the outline of the pumpkin and the dots. And then you can see in this book, hers are bright yellow lights for the pumpkin. So it doesn't have to be the orange or brown that we usually see on pumpkins. You can make up your own design. So I hope you enjoyed learning about Yayoi Kusama today, and stay creative while you're finishing up your pumpkin. See you later.